toi, Euros T, MRE here tonight, and the room is finally quiet, and the day has done everything it can do to you, then Aya Euros TMM glad you found your way to me. Go ahead and get comfortable. Pull the blanket up a little higher if you need to. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. If there are Euros TM's rain outside your window, let it stay there. If the house is creaking, let it creak. If you are Euros TMRE listening in the dark, Thutta Euros TM's all right too. Sometimes these stories feel better in the dark, not because they are Euros TMRE easier, but because the dark has a way of making everything honest. You can hear your own thoughts in it. You can hear the small sounds of a place settling. You can feel how alone you really are, and sometimes Thutta Euros TM's, the exact mood these kinds of stories need. Tonight, I want to take you with me into a part of the world that still lives inside my nerves in a way I canna, Euros TMT, fully explain. The backroads that cut through the Appalachian hills have their own kind of silence. It isn't a Euros TMT, peaceful silence, not always. A lot of the time it feels watchful. The roads are narrow, the turns come fast, the shoulders fall away into brush and creek beds and steep black woods, and after a certain hour, the only light you get is what your headlights can catch before it disappears again. I grew up around roads like that. Aya Euros TMVE, driven them in summer when the air was heavy and wet, in winter when the ridges were hard and silver under moonlight, and in that strange in-between season when the dead leaves stay slick on the pavement and every hollow seems to hold on to cold longer than it should. So settle in with me. And if you enjoy these late-night stories, if you like having a quiet voice to sit with while the house goes still around you, then do the small kind thing and like the video, subscribe if you haven't a Euros TMT already, and leave me a comment telling me where you are, Euros TMRE, listening from tonight. I always like reading those later, seeing how many distant rooms and parked cars and night shifts and lonely beds these stories travel into. What I a Euros TMM about to tell you isn't a Euros TMT, loud horror. It isn't a Euros TMT, the kind that jumps out and vanishes. Eat a Euros TM slower than that. Eat a Euros TMs, the kind that starts with a wrong feeling so small you almost feel embarrassed for noticing it. A door not sitting the way it should, a voice that sounds friendly but not warm. A patch of road that seems to go on longer than you remember. The kind of fear that asks politely to be ignored right up until the moment it doesn't Euros TMT need permission anymore. And once you are Euros TMVE felt that kind of fear for real, once it has put its hand on the back of your neck, even gently, you don't Euros TMT move through the world the same way again. The first time I understood, that was on a road I had driven so many times that I could almost take it by muscle memory. It was late October, the kind of night where the air felt dry and cold enough to sharpen every smell. I had been helping my cousin move a few boxes out of a rental outside of Beckley, and by the time we were done, it was later than I meant to stay. We stood under his porch light for a while, talking about nothing important, both of us dragging our feet, because neither one wanted to say out loud that winter was close, and life had gotten a little harder than either of us expected. I remember the porch boards under my shoes feeling cold through the soles, and I remember the smell of cardboard dust and old carpet still on my hands. His place sat off a county road that fed into one of those long, winding routes through the hills, the kind with no shoulder and no houses for stretches that make you suddenly aware of how far your own front door really is. I wasn't a Euros TMT, upset, exactly. I was tired in that familiar end-of-day way, where your thoughts get soft around the edges. I had the heater going low in my truck, and the vents smelled faintly like dust burning off for the first time that season. There were a few fast food wrappers on the passenger floorboard, and an empty coffee cup in the console that had gone cold hours earlier. The radio was on, quiet enough to feel more like company than sound. I remember pressing my palms against the steering wheel at a stop sign and noticing how cold my fingers still were from carrying boxes. That was my state of mind then, nothing dramatic. Just tired, hungry, and ready to get home. Those roads at night can do strange things to your sense of distance. In daylight, Thia Euros TMRE just roads. You notice the mailboxes, the sagging fences, the little churches, the creeks running parallel to the asphalt. At night, all of that collapses into slices of visibility and darkness. Your headlights sweep across bare trees and old reflectors, and the occasional rusted gate, and whatever ISNA Euros TMT caught in that beam might as well not exist. I had made that drive dozens of times, maybe more, and I knew where the sharp turns were. I knew the one stretch where the pavement dipped low by the creek. I knew the boarded house with the satellite dish still mounted on it for no reason. I even knew the gas station 20 minutes out where the soda machine by the door had been broken for over a year. That kind of knowing makes you comfortable, and comfort makes you less alert than you should be. About 30 minutes into the drive, I saw a pickup pulled over near the mouth of an old gravel access road. It was angled strangely, front tires almost in the ditch, passenger door hanging open into the dark. At first, I thought maybe somebody had slid a little too far off the road. It happened a lot around there. The truck had no hazards on, which was the first thing that pricked at me. Just a dull shape sitting under weak moonlight, with one door open like it had been abandoned in a hurry. I drove past it, and I would have kept going, if I hadn't a Euros TMT caught sight of someone standing near the back of it. Just one person, a man maybe, hard to tell with the dark and the headlights moving over him. He raised one arm, not waving wildly, just lifting it. I passed him by maybe 50 yards before guilt got the better of me. Thought a Euros TMs, the thing I hate admitting. I didn't a Euros TMT stop because I felt safe. I stopped because I didn't a Euros TMT want to be the kind of person who left somebody alone on a cold road in the middle of nowhere. There are Euros TMs, a kind of rural politeness that gets built into you early. You stop, you ask if they need help, you lend a phone, you at least make sure nobody a Euros TM's hurt. And because I a Euros TMD grown up around that, my first instinct wasn't a Euros TMT fear. My first instinct was obligation. I pulled onto the narrow gravel at the roadside and backed up until I was close enough to roll down my window. My headlights lit his truck at an angle, and that was when I noticed the second thing that felt wrong. There was nobody in the cab. Not unusual by itself, but the passenger door was open and the inside light was no Euros TMT on. It should have been. Old truck, maybe faulty wiring, I told myself. The man walked up on my side, slowly enough that I didn't know Euros TMT tense at first. He looked to be maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, lean in the way some men get from hard work and cigarettes, with a camouflage jacket and a dark knit cap pulled low over his ears. His face was narrow, not scary, just tired looking. But he smiled too soon. Before I had even asked him anything, he was already smiling like we were meeting halfway through a joke. A circumflex Euros. Oh, you got a phone on you. A circumflex Euros, he asked. His voice was flat and soft. He stood a little too close to the door. I kept my hands on the wheel and said yeah, probably, and reached for it in the cup holder. I asked if he needed me to call somebody. He looked over his shoulder toward the gravel road beside his truck. It disappeared into trees so dense my headlights barely touched the first few trunks. A circumflex Euros, oh my brother a Euros TM's up there. A circumflex Euros, he said. A circumflex Euros, oh, went to see if he could get enough room to turn around. We was trying to get to my uncle Euros TM's place. A circumflex Euros, it was a bad explanation, but not bad enough for me to reject on the spot. I asked who he wanted me to call, and he said, A circumflex Euros, oh let me see if ETA Euros TM's got signal first. A circumflex Euros, that was the first moment my body reacted before my mind did. It was small, just a tightening in my stomach. Nobody asks to test your phone for signal unless they want the phone in their hand, and maybe plenty of people would think nothing of that, but I did. I glanced at the empty dark around us, and then back at him, and said I could dial whoever he needed. He kept smiling. A circumflex Euros. Oh, I just need to walk up a second with it. A circumflex Euros. I laughed a little, because I didn't a Euros TMT know what else to do. The laugh sounded thin, even to me. A circumflex Euros. Oh, I Euros TMM. Not letting my phone disappear into the woods, man. A circumflex Euros. He didn't a Euros TMT laugh back. That was the next red flag. Most normal people would have smiled, shrugged, maybe apologized, maybe explained better. He just held that same expression and looked at me without blinking for a second too long. Then he nodded once, like he was agreeing to something I hadn't a Euros TMT heard. A circumflex Euros O could use a ride up there. Then circumflex Euros, he said. The temperature in the truck suddenly felt wrong. Too warm against my face, cold at my hands. I remember the smell of heater dust getting stronger because I became aware of my own breathing. I told him I really wasn't a Euros TMT headed that way and asked again if there was a number I could call. He leaned down a little, trying to peer into the passenger seat, maybe to see if anyone else was with me. There wasn't a Euros TMT. Thata Euros TMs when I noticed mud on the front of his jacket, high across the chest, not splashed from a ditch, but smeared, fresh enough to still look wet in the lights. I don't a Euros TMT know why that detail mattered so much, but it did. Before he could say anything else, another voice called from the darkness up the gravel road. Not loud, not panicked, just a Mana Euros TM's voice saying, A circumflex Euros O you getting service. A circumflex Euros. The sound of it made every hair rise on my arms. I couldn't a Euros TMT see the second person at all. Just the voice from somewhere in the trees, maybe 30 or 40 feet back where my headlights gave up. The man by my window turned his head toward it and answered, A circumflex Euros O working on it. A circumflex Euros working on it. I can still hear the way he said that, calm, casual, like getting me out of the truck was already underway. I said, A circumflex Euros O. You know what? I think I a Euros TMVE got 1 bar. Give me a number. A circumflex Euros, he looked back at me, and for the first time the smile dropped, not into anger. That would have made more sense. It just went flat, empty. He said, A circumflex Euros, oh no need. A circumflex Euros, then he put one hand on the top edge of my door. Not grabbing, not yanking, just resting it there like he was getting comfortable. My body moved before I had a plan. I dropped the truck into drive so fast I ground the gears. Gravel spit from under the tires. He slapped the side of the door and stepped back, and in my mirror I saw him run 2 hard steps toward the bed of his truck like he was going for something. I didn't a Euros TMT wait to see what. I hit the gas and fishtailed enough that for a second I thought I was going to lose the road entirely. The rear of my truck kicked toward the ditch, caught, straightened, and then I was tearing around the next bend, with my heart beating so hard it hurt under my ribs. I drove like that for maybe 10 minutes before I even realized my mouth was open. I had one hand white-knuckled on the wheel and the other trying to dial 911 without dropping the phone. The operator kept asking where I was, and I could barely answer because I didn't a Euros TMT know the exact road marker, only landmarks, only that I had passed the old lumber yard and not yet crossed the small bridge by the church. My voice sounded high and strange to me. I told her there were 2 men on the side of the road, and something wasn't a Euros TMT right, and one of them had put his hand on my door. Even as I said it, I felt stupid. It didn't a Euros TMT sound like enough. It sounded like nothing had really happened. But the operator took it seriously enough to send a deputy to check. I didn't a Euros TMT go back. I kept driving until I reached the gas station with the broken soda machine. The fluorescent lights there were so harsh and ugly that night they looked beautiful to me. I pulled in crooked by the air pump and sat with the engine running, both hands still on the steering wheel, feeling the aftershock move through my body in waves. I kept looking in the mirrors. Every set of headlights on the road made my chest tighten. I called my cousin first because he was closest, and when he answered I couldn't a Euros TMT quite explain it in a straight line. I told him where I was and said, A circumflex Euros. Oh, can you just stay on the phone? A circumflex Euros. He heard something in my voice and didn't a Euros TMT ask too many questions. When the deputy finally called me back, he said he had found the location I described, but there was no truck there, no people either, just fresh tire marks near the shoulder and a second set of prints leading up the gravel road. He asked if anything had been stolen or if threats had been made. I said no. He told me I had probably done the right thing by leaving if I felt unsafe. Probably. That word sat with me. It still does. By the time I got home, my house felt unfamiliar in the way normal rooms can feel when you bring fear inside with you. I locked the deadbolt, then checked the windows, then checked the back door twice. I turned on lights I normally never used. The refrigerator humming in the kitchen sounded too loud. The hallway to the bedroom looked longer than usual. I washed my hands because I could still feel the steering wheel under them, the vibration of the truck pulling away, that hand on the top of the door. I stood at the sink with cold water running over my fingers until they ached. Sleep didn't TMT come easy that night. Every time I started to drift off, I heard that voice from the trees again. You getting service? Working on it. There was something so ordinary about those words. That was part of what got to me. Real danger dosna TMT always announce itself in a dramatic way. Sometimes it just sounds like two men talking in the dark, as if they're TMs. No reason in the world for you to be afraid. The next morning, I drove the long way to work to avoid that road. And then I avoided it again, the day after that, and then for weeks after that. I told a few people the story, and most of them gave me the same look, the one that says they believe I was scared, but arena TMT. Sure, anything was actually wrong. Maybe the truck had broken down. Maybe the second man really was his brother. Maybe they were just odd. Maybe I overreacted. Thought TM's the worst part about these things sometimes. Not the event itself, but how easy it is to argue yourself out of your own instincts afterward. But I know what my body felt before my thoughts caught up. I know the way his smile changed when I didn't TMT, give him what he wanted. I know the way he looked into my truck to make sure I was alone. I know how quickly he moved when I pulled away. There are details you can doubt and details you canna TMT. My body knew before my pride did, and I TMVE learned not to insult that kind of knowledge anymore. What stays with me now isna TMT, just the fear. Eta TM's how thin the line can be between an ordinary night and one that opens a crack in your sense of the world. I had spent that whole evening doing something harmless, something domestic, carrying boxes and making small talk under a porch light. I was thinking about leftover food in my fridge and whether I had enough gas to make it home. Then one stop on a dark road turned all of that soft, normal thinking into something else entirely. That shift is what changed me. Fear dosno TMT always come from the huge, obvious things. Sometimes it comes from how quickly your assumptions can fail. After that, I started noticing how often politeness fights with instinct. How many times people keep themselves in bad situations because they don't TMT, want to seem rude, or dramatic, or paranoid. I had done it myself more than once, and I TMD do it again in different ways, because most of us are taught to smooth a moment over before we trust the discomfort growing in our chest. We are taught to explain things kindly. We are taught to give people the benefit of the doubt, and most of the time thata TM's fine. Most of the time eta TM's even good. But there are moments when that training can put you one bad decision away from not getting another chance to listen to yourself. The older I get, the more I believe fear has textures. There are TM's the fear that shocks you, and then there are TM's the quieter fear that settles into your habits, the one that makes you glance twice into your rearview mirror on empty roads, the one that makes you keep your keys in your hand a little tighter crossing a parking lot, the one that changes the way you answer a knock at the door after dark. Eta TM's not always dramatic. It just rearranges you a little. I learned that again a year later in a place that should have felt safer than any roadside ever could, because it belonged to my family and because I had known it since I was a child. If you want to know how a place can turn on you without moving at all, it happened in my Anta TM's house, up near the Virginia line, in a valley where fog sat low in the mornings and the ridges kept the daylight shorter than it felt like it should be. My aunt had lived alone there since my uncle died. The house was old but well kept, with a gravel drive, a wraparound porch, and a stand of hemlocks behind it that made the whole backside of the property feel shaded, even in summer. I used to go there when I was younger for Sunday dinners and birthdays, and long afternoons where nothing much happened, except adults talking in the kitchen, while kids wandered outside with sticks and flashlights. It was one of those houses where every room had its own smell. The front room always smelled faintly like cedar and old upholstery. The kitchen smelled like coffee and fried food, no matter what time of day it was. The spare bedroom smelled like cold linens from a closet. There are houses that teach your body to relax the second you step into them, and hers had always been one of those for me. When she had a minor surgery and needed somebody to stay a couple nights afterward, I volunteered without thinking much about it. I drove up on a Thursday afternoon in early March. The trees were still bare. There was old snow tucked into shadowed ditches, dirty and granular, and the sky had that pale gray color that makes everything look quiet before dark even arrives. My aunt was doing fine, just sore and moving slower than usual. She had pain medicine on the counter, soup in the fridge, and 3 different blankets folded over the back of the couch because she was always cold. The house felt exactly as I remembered, warm but drafty in spots, a little too dim in the hall. The old clock in the dining room ticking louder than any clock should, familiar enough that I let go of my guard almost immediately. That first evening was completely ordinary. I made her tea, heated soup, took out the trash, and sat with her while the local news murmured in the background. The weather forecast was talking about a cold rain overnight. You could already hear the wind brushing the porch screen by then, a dry, scratchy sound. She went to bed early, and I stayed up in the living room with a lamp on and a paperback in my lap. I remember the shape of the light in that room so clearly. It never reached the corners. It made a yellow pool over the couch and left the doorway to the hall looking darker by contrast, like the house was receding there. I wasn't a Euros TMT nervous, not even close. I felt useful, a little sleepy, and kind of comforted by the old familiar sounds. The refrigerator cycling on in the kitchen, the little settling knocks houses make as the temperature changes. Once in a while my aunt coughing in her room down the hall. Outside, when the rain finally started, it came soft at first and then steadier, tapping the windows and dripping from the gutters in a rhythm that should have made the whole night feel safe. The first thing that felt wrong was so small I almost laughed at myself. I went into the kitchen to rinse out a bowl, and when I turned toward the back door, I saw it standing open about 2 inches, not wide open, not dramatic, just unlatched, with the black line of the storm outside visible through the gap. I stared at it for a second, bowl still in my hand, and went through the obvious explanations. I had taken the trash out earlier. Maybe I hadn't a Euros TMT pulled it fully shut. Maybe the old frame had shifted in the damp weather. Maybe my aunt had opened it during the day and not latched it. It didn't a Euros TMT scare me, not exactly. It just bothered me, because I was almost sure I had checked it after dark. I set the bowl down, shut the door firmly, and tested the knob twice. Locked, fine. I told myself that was all it was. An old door in an old house. But when I went back into the living room, I found I was listening a little more carefully than before. The rain sounded heavier. The wind had changed direction and was pushing against the side of the house with a low, steady pressure. I tried to go back to reading, but my attention kept thinning. Every few pages I caught myself looking at the hall. After maybe 20 minutes, I heard footsteps overhead. That by itself should have been impossible, or close to it. The upstairs rooms were unfinished storage, and nobody ever went up there at night, because the stairs were narrow and steep, and the light at the top had been burned out for years. I had been up there plenty of times in daylight. It was all trunks, old chairs, boxes of holiday decorations, things stacked under the slope of the roof. My aunt never went up there anymore, and no one else was in the house. The footsteps were light, slow, and crossed from one side of the upstairs to the other. I put the book down and sat still, trying to decide if I had really heard what I thought I heard. Rain can do strange things through gutters and roof lines. Old wood expands and pops. Branches scrape. I knew all of that. I told myself all of that. Then I heard it again. 3 soft creaks in a pattern that sounded unmistakably like weight shifting across floorboards. My skin went cold in that instant, but I still did what people do. I rationalized. Maybe a raccoon. Maybe something in the attic space. Maybe the wind. I even smiled to myself a little, embarrassed, because fear in a familiar house feels childish until it does no euros TMT. I got up and checked on my aunt. She was asleep, breathing heavily, one lamp still on by her bed. I stood in her doorway for a few seconds, listening, and felt stupid enough that I almost went back to the couch and let it go. But I did no euros TMT. I went to the bottom of the upstairs stairs and looked up into the dark. That stairwell had always bothered me as a kid because the angle was too steep and the ceiling tightened over it halfway up. Looking at it then, with only the hall light behind me, it felt even narrower. The top disappeared into black. I could smell dust and dry wood, and that cold, stored-away smell old houses keep in spaces no one lives in. A circumflesso euro legatura oe. Ello, a circumflex euros first called softly, because I did no euros TMT want to wake my aunt. Nothing answered, just rain. I did no euros TMT go up. I wish I could say I was brave or practical, but the truth is, I did no euros TMT want to. I stood there with one hand on the banister, listening to my own breathing, and finally decided there was no good reason to climb into the dark over a sound I was no euros TMT, even sure I euros TMD heard correctly. So I went back to the living room, locked the front door, even though it had already been locked, and turned on a second lamp. The next red flag came maybe an hour later, and this one was worse, because it involved my aunt. I had dozed off on the couch for a little while, not fully asleep, the way you do in a warm room with rain outside, when I heard her voice from the hall say my name, just my name, quietly. I sat up right away and answered, A circumflex euros, oh yeah. A circumflejo euro no response. I got up and went into the hall. Her bedroom door was partly closed. The light inside was off now. I pushed the door open and found her asleep in exactly the same position as before, mouth slightly open, blanket pulled to her chest. I stood there long enough to make sure she was actually asleep, and she was, deeply, the kind of sleep pain medicine gives you. There are euros TMs a particular feeling when your mind finally runs out of normal explanations. It does no euros TMT happen all at once. It happens in steps, and each step takes something away. By then the house no longer felt like my euros TM's house. It looked the same, smelled the same, sounded the same in places, but some deeper sense of belonging had shifted. The hall felt too long. The rooms felt arranged around me instead of open to me. I knew where everything was, but I no longer felt welcome in the space. I told myself, euros TMD stay awake the rest of the night. I made coffee at nearly 1 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table because it felt better than the living room. The overhead light there was harsh and flat, showing every scratch in the old wood table and every fingerprint on the sugar jar. I kept my phone beside me. The clock on the stove sounded absurdly loud each minute it changed. Nothing happened for a while, and that almost calmed me down. The coffee went bitter and cold. The rain softened. I started to feel ridiculous again. Then I heard the back doorknob turn, not rattle, turn, slowly. The sound was delicate and unmistakable, metal under pressure, and then the door moved inward a fraction before the deadbolt caught. I froze so completely I could feel the pulse in my throat against my collar. For one endless second, there was no other sound in the house at all. Then the knob turned again, harder this time, and the door shuddered in its frame. I was on my feet without remembering getting up. I grabbed the heaviest thing within reach, which turned out to be the old iron skillet from the stove, and backed into the hall. My mouth had gone dry. Every part of my body felt both numb and electric. Whoever was on the other side of that door knew enough to try the knob carefully first. I whispered my euros TM's name, then louder, and heard her stir in the bedroom. The knob turned a third time more violently, and then there came 3 knocks. Not pounding, just 3 spaced-out knocks that sounded patient. That patience terrified me more than if they had kicked the door in. I called 911 with one shaking hand while holding the skillet in the other. I remember giving the address and trying not to speak too loudly because some primitive part of me believed the person outside could hear every word. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. I asked her to stay with me, and she did. The knocks came again, same spacing, same calm rhythm. Then, from just outside the door, a woman a Euros TM's voice said, "A circumflex Euros. Oh, I think I got the wrong house. A circumflex Euros." That was the worst moment of the whole thing. Worse than the knob, worse than the knocks. Because for half a second relief flooded me. A woman, maybe a stranded driver, maybe somebody lost in the rain. Maybe all of this was about to become something ordinary and embarrassing. And right underneath that relief, something in me recoiled. The voice was wrong, too steady, too clear through the wood. Not drunk, not panicked, not apologetic, just placed there like a hand. I didn't a Euros TMT answer. The woman a Euros TM's voice came again, a little farther from the door this time. "A circumflex Euros, oh, could you help me? A circumflex Euros, no car engine, no footsteps in gravel, no sound of someone moving around on the porch. Just the voice." My aunt had come to her bedroom doorway by then, pale and groggy in her robe, asking what was happening. I told her to get back in the room and lock the door. I sounded calmer than I felt. That strange calm had taken over, the one that sometimes arrives when fear gets so big your body decides panic is no longer useful. I moved to the front room where I could see the porch from an angle through the side curtain without standing directly in front of the window. There was nobody there. The porch was empty, wet boards gleaming under the weak motion light, rain dripping from the edge of the roof, rocking chair still, no woman, no shape moving off the steps, nothing. I don't a Euros TMT know how long I stood there with my breath locked in my chest, but it felt long enough for the whole room to tilt slightly around me. The deputies arrived within 10 minutes, maybe less. Their headlights sweeping the yard almost made my knees give out. They searched the porch, the back of the house, the tree line, the drive, everything they could reach easily in the mud. They found wet prints on the back steps, but the rain had blurred them too badly to make much of. One of the deputies asked whether anybody had reason to bother my aunt. Another asked if she was sure she had locked up earlier. Then one of them went quiet by the porch and called the other over. Wedged between the screen door and the frame was a folded piece of notebook paper, dry on the inside, where the screen had sheltered it. There was no name on it, just one sentence in big, uneven print. "I heard you call for me." Neither deputy had much to say after that. They took the note, took a report, and advised my aunt to stay with relatives for a few days. I packed her bag before daylight, while she sat in the kitchen shivering under a blanket, even though the house was warm. I could barely make my hands work right. My mind kept going back to the voice saying my name in the hall before any of this started, and I still cannot tell you what that was. I don't a Euros TMT know if someone had been around the house longer than I realized. I don't a Euros TMT know if I had half dreamed that part. I only know how it felt. I drove my aunt to my mother a Euros TM's place after sunrise. The whole valley looked ordinary again in morning light. Patches of mist in the low ground, wet mailboxes, dogs out in yards. It made me angry, in a way. How normal everything looked. My aunt kept saying maybe some kids were playing a prank, but her voice was thin when she said it. She didn't a Euros TMT go back to that house alone after that. She stayed with family for 2 weeks, then sold the place less than a year later. Officially, it was because the upkeep had gotten to be too much. Unofficially, neither of us could stand how the house felt anymore. For months afterward, any time I woke in the night and thought I heard someone call my name from another room, I would lie perfectly still and listen until my whole body hurt. I became very careful about voices, about knocks, about the way doors sound when they move without being invited. It changed something basic in me because it proved that even places soaked in memory can go wrong. Safety built from history can collapse fast. A familiar house is still just wood, glass, locks, darkness, and the distance between one room and another. That a Euros TM's another hard lesson fear teaches. We think familiarity protects us because it gives us maps. We know where the hall turns. We know which step creaks. We know how the porch settles in wind. But sometimes that deep knowledge only gives fear more places to hide. When something is wrong in a strange place, at least your unease has something obvious to hold on to. But when something is wrong in a place tied to childhood, to family, to years of ordinary life, it unsettles you in a deeper way. It makes you question the reliability of your own comfort. IA Euros TMVE thought a lot about why the quiet things stay with me more than the obvious threats. ETA Euros TMs because they burrow deeper. A hand on a car door, a voice through wood, a note left where rain almost took it. These are small things on paper, small enough that you can tell them and hear yourself sounding dramatic. But your body doesna Euros TMT measure danger that way. Your body remembers tone, timing, the shape of a pause, the wrongness in a voice trying to sound harmless. It remembers faster than pride can edit it. Maybe Theta Euros TMs, why the next one hit me so hard, because I nearly ignored every warning again, simply because the person involved knew exactly how to appear helpful. It happened in late summer on a road outside Hazard, when the heat still rose off the asphalt after dark, and the cicadas kept going even at midnight. That night started with car trouble, and car trouble is one of those things that strips a situation down fast. You stop being whoever you were all day and become a person standing beside a machine that may or may not decide your next few hours for you. I had been driving home from a friend of Euros TM's cookout, sticky with smoke and bug spray, and too much sweet tea, my shirt damp at the collar from the heat. The road I took cut between stretches of woods and long shallow yards where trailers sat back from the pavement with porch lights burning. It wasn't a Euros TMT deserted, not completely, but traffic got thin after 10. My car had been making a faint whining sound all week, and I had done what too many people do when money is tight. I told myself IA Euros TMD, get it looked at soon. Soon turned into another few days. Then, about 15 miles from home, the temperature gauge lurched higher than it should have, and a sharp chemical smell pushed through the vents. I pulled over near a little gravel turnout by a rusted guardrail. The engine ticked and hissed when I shut it off. When I got out, hot air rolled up from under the hood with that sweet burnt smell coolant has, and I just stood there for a second, under a sky, with hardly any moon, listening to the cicadas and distant water moving somewhere below the road. It was still hot enough that sweat gathered at the base of my neck almost immediately, but the woods beside the turnout were already black and close. My phone had one bar, then none, then one again. I texted a friend my location in case the message went through and tried calling roadside assistance. The call failed twice. At first it was only frustrating, nothing more. I propped the hood, though I wasn't a Euros TMT going to fix anything in the dark, and stood there with my flashlight app pointed uselessly at hoses and metal I barely understood. I remember thinking mostly about logistics. If the call won a Euros TMT go through, maybe I wait for a car. Maybe I walk until I get service. Maybe I sit inside with the doors locked and try again in 10 minutes. It was all practical, all manageable. Then a tow truck appeared around the bend, so suddenly it made me flinch. Its amber light bar wasn't a Euros TMT on. That struck me immediately, because every local tow truck I had ever seen used those lights like an announcement. This one rolled up slow and quiet and stopped a little too far behind me. The driver got out, a broad man in work pants and a faded company shirt I couldn't a Euros TMT, quite red in the dark. He called out, "Acer Complex Euros oh need a pull. Acer Complex Euros relief is dangerous. It opens the door before judgment arrives." I said yeah, maybe, and walked a few steps toward him. He had the kind of face that can look friendly from a distance and unreadable up close. Thick forearms, graying beard, sweat darkening the shirt under his arms. He came forward with a flashlight of his own and shined it, not at the car, but at me first, quick and assessing, then at the open hood. "A circumflex Euros, oh water, Euros TM she doing?" "A circumflex Euros," he asked. I explained as best I could. He nodded, said he knew cars like mine, said overheating on that model could be a hose or a thermostat, nothing to panic over. The confidence in his voice calmed me a little. He didn't a Euros TMT seem strange. He seemed practiced, familiar, exactly the kind of roadside help you hope for. But then the first tiny wrong thing came. I asked what company he was with, and he answered after a beat too long. "A circumflex Euros oh just local." "A circumflex Euros." I thought maybe he hadn't a Euros TMT heard me. I pointed to the shirt and said, "A circumflex Euros oh." I canna Euros TMT read that. A circumflex euros. He looked down at it like he had forgotten what he was wearing. A circumflex euros, oh old shirt. A circumflex euros, he said. A circumflex euros, oh company sold. IA euros TMM independent now. A circumflex euros, it was plausible. Plenty of independent tow operators exist. Still, something in the hesitation lodged in me. He moved around the front of my car, shining the flashlight over the engine without really looking at any one thing. Then he said, A circumflex euros. Oh, I can take you, and the car. Where you headed? A circumflex euros first told him the town, and he let out a low whistle. A circumflex euros, oh thotter. Euros TM's a haul this time of night. A circumflex euros, oh IA. Euros T, MVE got roadside. A circumflex euros, I said. A circumflex euros, oh, if I can get a call through. A circumflex euros, oh, no need to wait on that. If you don't a euros TMT want. Fire euros TMLL leave you sitting here forever. A circumflex euros again, reasonable, maybe even true, but he said it too quickly, like he was stepping over my options instead of adding to them. I asked what he charged. He said, hey euros TMD, work it out later. That was the second wrong thing. Anybody who does that kind of work knows Thea euros TMRE, going to be asked price first, especially by someone stranded on a dark road. A normal answer would have been rough, maybe flexible, but definite enough to build trust. His answer felt designed to postpone the part where specifics might matter. I looked toward my phone again and said I might give roadside one more try. He leaned against the fender of my car and smiled, not unlike the man on the roadside months before, except this smile had warmth in it on the surface. A circumflex euros, O signala euros TM's bad. All through here. A circumflex euros, he said. A circumflex euros. Oh, I got a radio in the truck if I need one. A circumflex euros, the sweat on my back had gone cool by then. I had no euros TMT, asked him to call anybody. He was already moving toward control of the situation, and I could feel it. A car passed us going the opposite direction. Fast, not slowing. The brief wash of headlights made his truck easier to see. The name painted on the side had been scraped off or covered over. I couldn't a euros TMT tell which. There was just a rectangular patch of darker metal where lettering should have been. I noticed that and said nothing. He asked if anyone was expecting me home. I said yes, which was a lie. He asked if they knew my route. I said yes again. He nodded as if that information was filed away. Then he said, A circumflex euros, oh well, I can get you out of here before anyone starts worrying. A circumflex euros, everything in that sentence should have felt kind. It didn't a euros TMT. I moved casually toward my Drivera euros TM's door and said I needed to grab something from inside. He stepped back to give me room, but not far. The flashlight beam followed me. Once in the car, I shut the door and used the few seconds of barrier it gave me to think. My phone showed one thin bar. I dialed roadside again, and by some small miracle the call connected. I kept my voice steady, gave the operator my location, and while she was confirming details, I watched the man in the side mirror. He had stopped smiling. He was staring at me through the glass with a look that was not quite anger and not quite patience, more like calculation. When I got off the call, he tapped once on the window with 2 fingers. I lowered it, only an inch. A circumflex euros, oh, how long? A circumflex euros, he asked. A circumflex euros, oh, thia euros TMRE, sending someone. A circumflex euros, he chuckled and shook his head. A circumflex euros, oh, you are, euros TMLL, be here an hour easy. A circumflex euros, oh, thata, euros TM's okay. A circumflex euros, he bent a little lower, trying to catch my eyes through the crack. A circumflex euros, oh, no reason to sit out here if you don't a euros TMT have to. A circumflex euros, I said. A circumflex euros, oh, IA, euros TMM, fine. A circumflex euros for a second. We just looked at each other. Then he nodded, in a way that felt final, and walked back toward his truck. Relief started to loosen my chest, but it didn't a euros TMT last. He opened his Drivera euros TM's door, leaned in, and instead of leaving, he stayed there, digging around maybe. looking for something. I couldn't a Euros TMT tell. Then he closed the door and began walking toward me again, this time with no flashlight in his hand. I hit the lock button, though the doors were already locked. He came to the window and said, "A circumflex Euros, oh mind if I use your phone real quick. Minya Euros TM's dead." A circumflex Euros fast almost laughed at how naked the lie was. He had just told me he had a radio. I shook my head. A circunflejo euro ligadurawe. Sorry. A circumflex Euros, that was the moment the hidden part of him showed through. Not fully, just enough. His face didn't a Euros TMT twist. He didn't a Euros TMT shout. He just let every trace of friendliness drain away, and his voice got flatter when he said, "A circumflex Euros, oh you probably ought not sit alone out here. A circumflex Euros, oh Euros TMM not alone. A circumflex Euros," I said, lifting my phone slightly. "A circumflex Euros, oh people know where I am." A circumflex Euros. He looked at me for another second, then at the back seat, then over his shoulder toward the woods. That glance to the woods is what I remember most, like he was checking something, or someone, or just whether the road was still empty enough. Then he walked back to his truck and turned the engine on. He didn't a Euros TMT leave. He rolled forward instead, past my car, and parked across the road at an angle facing me with his headlights on low beam, not blocking me completely, but close enough that if I tried to pull out a Euros TMD have to edge around him. He sat there with the engine idling. I cannot explain how oppressive it felt to be watched that way. The sound of his diesel motor sat in the night, like a threat that had no Euros TMT decided on words yet. My car was off to protect the overheating engine, so I had no sound around me, except insects, distant water, and that idle. The low beams made the inside of my car feel exposed. I called 911 then, not roadside, and whispered the situation, because I didn't a Euros TMT want him seeing my lips move too much. I gave them the truck description, the location, the fact that he was waiting instead of leaving. The dispatcher asked if he had threatened me. I said not directly. Saying it out loud made me feel crazy again, but she stayed on the line. For 20 minutes he sat there. Sometimes I could see the glow of a cigarette in the cab. Sometimes the brake lights flickered like he was shifting his foot. Once he got out and walked to the edge of the road and stood looking down into the dark toward the creek, hands on his hips, as if he had all the time in the world. He never came back to my window. That somehow made it worse. If he had pounded on the glass, I could have hated him cleanly. Instead he waited, and waiting creates space for doubt to creep in. When the actual tow truck arrived, amber lights blazing bright over the bend, the man across from me moved instantly. His truck pulled off so fast gravel snapped from under the tires. He didn't a Euros TMT even look at me as he passed. The real tow driver was a young guy with a company logo, paperwork, dispatch number, everything clear and ordinary in the way it should have been. I was so rattled I think he realized it before I said much. He asked if I wanted him to wait while I spoke to the deputy who was on the way. I said yes. The deputy took my statement and drove a short stretch in the direction the man had gone, but they never found him. I gave the best description I could, and it felt inadequate the second it left my mouth. Broad man, grey beard, old tow truck with no readable company name. It was the sort of description half the county could fit. The deputy was kind but careful, the way people are when nothing prosecutable has happened. He said maybe the man had just been trying to help and got offended. Maybe. That word again. I rode in the cab of the real tow truck all the way to the garage with my hands clenched between my knees, not speaking much. The vinyl seat was cracked. The cab smelled like grease, coffee, and pine air freshener. It should have felt grimy, but it felt safe because it was honest. By the time I got home it was nearly 3 a.m. My shirt had dried stiff with sweat. I sat on the side of my bed in the dark for a long time without taking my shoes off. For weeks afterward, every time I saw a tow truck in my mirror at night, my stomach tightened. I started checking company markings automatically, license numbers if I could, the details I a Euros TMD once ignored. It isn't a Euros TMT that I came to believe everyone is dangerous. I didn't a Euros TMT, But I did come to understand how easily danger can wear the face and posture of help. Sometimes the hidden intention is no euros TMT revealed by some dramatic turn. Sometimes eta euros TMs revealed by impatience when you insist on keeping control of your own choices. That lesson followed me into one of the strangest nights IA euros TMVE ever had, because the next road wasn't a euros TMT, just lonely, and it wasn't a euros TMT, just unsafe in the ordinary human way. It was one of those places where the land itself seems to refuse explanation after a certain hour. IA euros TMM, careful with stories like this, because I don't a euros TMT, like making things bigger than they were. I don't a euros TMT, want to sound like IA euros TMM selling mystery. Most of what scares me can be explained by people, by timing, by nerves, by bad luck. But there was one night on a fire road above a ridge in eastern Tennessee that I still cannot fit neatly into any version of common sense. I had gone up there with a friend named Caleb to watch a meteor shower. We were both in our late 20s, both stubborn enough to think backroads were always more manageable than they are. Caleb knew of a turnout near an old fire tower that offered a clean view over the valley. It was legal enough, or close enough, and we went in his old SUV loaded with folding chairs, a cooler with canned coffee, and 2 blankets because the temperature dropped hard at elevation, even in September. We left town before midnight and drove up a pavement road that narrowed to gravel, and then narrowed again to something barely deserving the word road at all. The trees crowded close in places, limbs brushing the sides with a dry whisper. Once we got near the top, the air coming in the cracked windows turned cold and resin-scented, all pine and damp stone. The night felt good at first, thought a euros TM's important. It felt clean and wide and ordinary in a beautiful way. We reached the turnout, set up our chairs, and looked out over a darkness so deep it seemed to erase distance. Far below, scattered lights from houses and roads made soft little constellations of their own. The sky was clear enough to show more stars than you ever get in town. Caleb talked about work, about a girl he had recently started seeing, about nothing serious. We drank canned coffee that tasted metallic and sweet. Somewhere beyond the trees an owl called once, then again much farther off. For more than an hour, nothing was wrong. The meteor shower was decent, not spectacular, but enough to keep us looking up. We were comfortable. We were where we meant to be. I remember lying back with the blanket over my legs and feeling that rare sense of being very small in a peaceful way. The gravel under the chair legs, the cold night air in my nose, the faint creak of metal when I shifted, those details matter to me now because of how sharply they contrast with what came later. The first odd thing was a light moving through the trees below the turnout. It wasn't a euros TMT on the road. That much was clear. It was lower down the slope, weaving slowly between trunks where no vehicle should have been able to go. At first, I thought it was someone hiking with a flashlight, but the beam was too steady and too low. Then I thought maybe an ATV farther off than it looked. Caleb saw it too and said, "Acer complex euros O." What the hell is that? Acer complex euros. We watched it for a while, both talking ourselves into harmless explanations. It moved left, paused, then vanished behind a rise. A few minutes later, it appeared again farther to the right, no louder, no closer. If there was an engine, we couldn't a euros TMT hear it. Wind moved lightly through the needles above us. The cold felt sharper all of a sudden. Acer complex euros, O eta euros TMs probably on another road. Acer complex euros, Caleb said. Acer complex euros, oh, maybe. Acer complex euros. There was no reason to be scared yet. It was just odd. Remote places create visual confusion at night. Distance gets slippery. We kept watching the sky. The second thing came maybe 20 minutes later. We heard what sounded like someone calling from the road behind us. Not shouting, more like a voice carrying accidentally. Both of us turned at once. The road behind the turnout was empty, just pale gravel fading into black between the trees. Caleb stood up and listened. Acer complex euros, oh, you hear that? Acir complejo euro IAD, but only once, maybe 2 syllables, not clear enough to recognize as words. He called out, Acer complex euros, oh, hello? A circumflex euros, nothing answered. We waited. Nothing. Then he laughed a little and said, maybe it was people farther down the ridge. The sound had not come from farther down the ridge. I didn't euros TMT argue with him because I wanted the same explanation he did. Thought euros TMs how these nights go. You collaborate with denial. It feels practical at the time. We sat back down, but neither of us relaxed the same way again. The coffee suddenly seemed like a bad idea. The cold pressed more insistently through the blanket. Every small sound in the brush gained a little more weight. After another 15 minutes, Caleb said he was going to walk to the SUV and grab the heavier flashlight from the back. He left the turnout and disappeared behind the vehicle. I heard him open one of the back doors, heard items shifting, then heard him say, in a voice so normal it took me a second to register the words, A circumflex euros. Oh, why is there another chair out here? A circumflex euros. I got up. On the far side of the SUV, partly in shadow, was a folding camp chair neither of us had brought. It was old, canvas faded almost grey, set up facing the turnout from the tree line, as if someone had been sitting there watching us. I know we had not missed it before. We had parked, unloaded, moved around the exact spot where it sat. There is no world in which that chair had been there all along. Caleb shined the flashlight on it. The seat was dry. The ground beneath it was undisturbed except for pine needles. No footprints I could see in the scattered beam. Just the chair, open and waiting. The fear that moved through me then was different from roadside fear. With a person, you look for intention. With something unexplained, your mind keeps reaching for edges and finding none. Caleb said maybe some kids left it. I said maybe. Neither of us sounded convinced. He folded it up quickly and shoved it behind the SUV, as if reducing its shape would reduce the unease. A circumflex euros. Oh, we should probably head out. A circumflex euros, I said. He nodded right away, which told me he was more rattled than he wanted to show. We loaded the chairs faster than we euros TMD set them up. The night around us felt tighter, less open. When I looked back toward the turnout, the valley lights seemed impossibly far away, like little signals from a world we had stepped out of by mistake. Caleb unlocked the SUV, and just as we both reached the doors, we heard footsteps on gravel somewhere behind us, on the road. Slow, measured, coming closer. There is a silence the body creates when ETA euros TMs, listening for confirmation of its own fear. We both went still inside that silence. The footsteps continued for maybe 5 or 6 steps, then stopped. Caleb swung the flashlight toward the road. Nothing. The beam caught dust, weeds, the rough bark of pines, no person. Then, from the dark just beyond where the flashlight ended, a voice said, A circumflex euros. Oh, you took my seat. A circumflex euros. It was a mana euros TM's voice, low and rough, and close enough that my skin clenched all over. Caleb shouted, A circumflex euros. Oh, woa, euros TM's there. A circumflex euros. No answer. He moved the light left and right. Nothing. I got into the passenger side with my hands shaking so badly I fumbled the handle twice. Caleb got in, started the engine, and threw the SUV into reverse. Gravel sprayed. The headlights swung across the turnout, across the tree line, across the folded chair on the ground behind us. And for one fraction of a second, in the sweep of the lights, I saw someone standing on the far side of it, tall, narrow, pale face, or maybe just pale in the lights. Impossible to tell, absolutely still. Then the angle changed, and the figure was gone. We drove that road down much too fast. Caleb was breathing through his mouth, both hands locked on the wheel. The trees rushed at the windshield and fell away again in strobing patterns of shadow and light. About halfway down, the Suva Euros TM's radio, which had been off, clicked on by itself in a burst of static so loud I nearly hit the roof. Caleb swore and slapped at the controls. Static. Then a thin sound under it that might have been speech and might have been nothing at all. He turned the radio off and the cab went dead quiet, except for the engine and our breathing. When we finally hit pavement, neither of us spoke for several miles. We stopped at an all-night gas station and sat under the fluorescent canopy, drinking bad coffee. We didn't euros TMT want. just because the lights and the human clerk inside made the world feel arranged correctly again. Caleb kept insisting the chair had to have belonged to somebody camping nearby. He said the voice was probably some old guy messing with us. He said maybe the figure in the headlights was a tree or a trick of movement. I agreed with every explanation out loud because I needed them as badly as he did. But there were parts of it we could not smooth out. The chair, the light below the turnout where no road ran, the voice behind empty darkness. The fact that when Caleb went to the back of the SUV later that morning, after Hey Euro's TMD finally gotten home, the old folded chair was no longer there. He swore to me that he had thrown it behind the vehicle before we left. I believe him. I saw him do it. Maybe it bounced out onto the road. Maybe we imagined that part in the rush. Maybe. There are nights that leave you with nothing but maybes. What I do know is that I didn't Euro's TMT sleep at all after getting home. Dawn found me on my couch, with every light in the apartment on, shoes still on, listening to traffic start up outside. I kept seeing the turnout in my head, the dark shape of the extra chair angled toward us like a person Euro's TM's attention, made physical. For months after, if I came across an empty chair in the wrong place, in a yard, on a porch, at the edge of the woods, some part of me recoiled before reason could catch up. It still happens. Thought Euro's TM's the aftermath of certain fears. They attach themselves to ordinary objects and make them carry more weight than they should. There are Euro's TM's a grief in that too, I think. A low, slow grief. Because every frightening thing takes some harmless piece of life and stains it. A road, a porch light, a knock, a chair. After enough of that, the world does no Euro's TMT become unlivable. But it does become more crowded with meaning than it used to be. You move through it differently. You notice more. You trust less easily. You understand that loneliness in a place is not just about the absence of people. Sometimes Euro's TM's about the absence of explanation. By then, I had started to collect these stories in myself, whether I wanted to or not. I was no Euro's TMT chasing them. If anything, I was avoiding situations where I might gather another. But life keeps moving, and people still ask favors, and family still needs help, and roads still have to be driven after dark. The next one came to me through someone I thought I knew well enough to relax around. That may be the part that unsettles me most about it, even now. His name was Darren, and we had known each other casually since high school. Not close friends, not strangers. The kind of person you are Euro's TMD run into at the grocery store or a county fair and spend 10 minutes catching up with. He lived out near a narrow stretch of road that ran along a creek before climbing toward a cluster of houses on a ridge. One fall evening he messaged me asking if I could drop off a tool he had left at my brother Euro's TM's place after helping with some work. It was a socket set, nothing important, but he said he needed it early the next morning. My brother was out of town. I had the case in my garage, and Darren was only about 25 minutes away if I took the backroad shortcut. I almost told him to come get it another day. I was tired. It had been a long week, but he said he RO's TMDO me, and I was already in that mode of trying to be helpful before I really wanted to be. So I put the case in my passenger seat and left just after sunset. The drive out there was beautiful in that plain autumn way Appalachia does so well. The last light drained slowly from the ridges. Smoke from somebody Euro's TM's wood stove hung low over a field. The road dipped and rose through small patches of woods where the leaves had mostly fallen, leaving the bare branches black against a deepening blue sky. It was the kind of evening that could make you believe in simple things. Home lights turning on, dinner somewhere, dogs barking in distant yards. I listened to an old country station and felt more peaceful than anything. Darren texted me an address I didn't Euro's TMT recognize. That was the first mild surprise. I had thought I knew roughly where he lived. The address pinned farther out than I expected, beyond the cluster of homes I remembered, and onto a road that narrowed to patched asphalt, and then to gravel. I texted him to make sure, and he replied, "Yeah, Euro's TMM, staying with my uncle for a while. Keep coming. You are Euro's TMLL. See a green gate." That was ordinary enough. Lots of people out there stayed with relatives, on and off. I kept driving. The road got rougher the farther I went. My headlights picked up ruts, puddles reflecting silver, weeds leaning in from both sides. The creek beside the road flashed now and then between the trees, pale under the sky. I passed 2 houses in 10 minutes, then none. No streetlights, no porch lights ahead. Just road, woods, and an occasional mailbox tipped at an angle. I wasn't a Euros TMT scared, not then. Just alert in the way you get when you realize you are Euros TMVE gone farther from the familiar than expected. I remember rolling my window down an inch because the glass kept fogging. Cold, damp air came in smelling like leaves, mud, and creek water. Somewhere a dog barked once, then stopped. Eventually I saw the green gate. It hung open off a gravel pull-off where the road widened a little. Beyond it, a long driveway disappeared uphill between trees. No house visible from the road. I checked my phone. No signal. Darren had texted, just pull up. I hesitated, only for a second. Long enough to notice I was hesitating. Then I turned in. The driveway wound farther than it should have. My tires crunched over loose rock and then over patches of hard-packed dirt. Branches scraped the sides of the car. The woods were thick on both sides, and because the drive climbed, my headlights mostly caught trunks, underbrush, and the next blind turn upward. I started thinking how strange it was that I still couldn't a Euros TMT see a house. Then at last the drive opened into a flat clearing with what looked like an old single-wide trailer and a detached shed beside it. Only one outside light was on, over the trailer door. It buzzed faintly, attracting moths. Darren stepped out onto the little porch as I pulled up and lifted a hand. Relief came through me at once. He looked like himself. Same slouch, same baseball cap, same easy half smile. I got out with the socket set and joked about him sending me into the middle of nowhere for a toolbox. He laughed and said, "A circumflex Euros." "Oh yeah, sorry man. I should a Euros TMVE. Warned you how far back this place is." A circumflex Euros up close he seemed normal, but there was a tension under it. I couldn't a Euros TMT place. He kept glancing toward the woods at the edge of the clearing while we talked. I asked if his uncle was around, and he said, "A circumflex Euros inside somewhere." A circumflex Euros in a tone that sounded more dismissive than casual. The trailer door behind him was open a crack, and from inside came the smell of stale cigarette smoke, fried grease, and something sour underneath. I handed him the case. That should have been the end of it. It almost was. Then he said, "A circumflex Euros, you want a drink before you head out?" I got sodas. A circumflex Euros, there are invitations that feel like real hospitality, and there are invitations that feel automatic, offered out of habit more than desire. This one felt like something else. Not exactly forced, but urgent in a way I didn't at Euros TMT understand. I said no, I was heading back. He looked over his shoulder into the trailer, and then back at me. "A circumflex Euros. Oh, you sure? Eta Euros TM's dark as hell down that road. Sit a minuta." A circumflex Euros, those words shouldn't a Euros TMT have mattered. They did. Dark as hell down that road. Not a warning, more like a reminder. I said I really needed to go. Dorena Euros TM's half smile tightened. "A circumflex Euros, at least let me walk you around. Your rear tire looks a little low." A circumflex Euros that got my attention. I crouched immediately by the rear tire. It looked fine to me, maybe a little soft from the angle, maybe not. He came down off the porch and stood too close while I checked it. "A circumflex Euros. Oh, maybe Eta Euros TM's the front, then a circumflex Euros," he said. I stood up and said I thought they were all right. He laughed a little and said, "A circumflex Euros, just donor Euros TMT. Want you getting stranded out here?" A circumflex Euros, that was the first real chill, because nothing in his tone was openly threatening, but the sentence landed wrong. I took a step back toward my car and noticed then that there were no other vehicles in the clearing besides mine. If his uncle was there, where was his truck? Maybe behind the trailer, maybe in the shed. Still, the absence pressed on me. From inside the trailer, someone knocked once on the wall. Not a door, the wall itself. A heavy, dull thump. Darren turned his head sharply toward it. The easy expression fell off his face for a second. When he looked back at me, he was smiling again. But now it was the kind of smile you wear because someone might be watching. A circumflex euros. Oh, I should get on. A circumflex euros, I said. He nodded too quickly. A circumflex euros, oh yeah. Yeah, sure. A circumflex euros. I got in the car. He leaned on the open window frame before I could pull away. Again, not grabbing. Just resting his arm there as if the conversation was still going. A circumflex euros, oh, take it slow going back. A circumflex euros, he said. A circumflex euros, oh, real easy to miss the turn. A circumflex euros, oh, okay. A circumflex euros, he didn't a euros TMT move. I looked at him, waiting. He looked past me into the passenger seat, then into the back, checking if I was alone. That old instinctive alarm went off so hard it almost made my vision narrow. Finally, he pushed off the window and stepped back. A circumflex euros, oh, drive safe. A circumflex euros, I started the car and turned it around in as few movements as possible. As I angled toward the driveway, my headlights swept across the side of the trailer. There was a window there covered on the inside with something dark, maybe a blanket. For 1 second, a shape pressed against it from behind, enough to bulge the fabric outward, then vanished. I hit the driveway without giving myself time to process it. Going downhill, I kept watching the mirror. Halfway to the gate, I saw headlights appear at the top near the trailer. A vehicle. So there had been another one after all, or one had been hidden from view. The lights stayed there a moment, then started down after me. My hands went slick on the wheel. Maybe Darren or his uncle was just leaving. Maybe they wanted to make sure I got out all right. Thought a euros TM's what I told myself for exactly 10 seconds. Then the vehicle behind me accelerated. That driveway was narrow, rough, and full of blind bends. You don't know euros TMT speed on it, unless you don't know euros TMT care what happens to the car or the person ahead of you. The headlights swelled larger in my mirror, bouncing hard with the ruts. I pressed the gas. Branches slapped the sides. Gravel spit. My car fishtailed once and corrected. The vehicle behind me flashed its headlights twice. That panicked me more than if they had stayed steady. It felt communicative. Deliberata. I burst through the open green gate too fast and swung onto the road. The car behind me followed within seconds. I couldn't a euros TMT tell make or color, only the highlights and the shape of a bigger vehicle, maybe a truck or SUV. The road was too narrow to let it pass, and it closed the distance with frightening ease. When it got right on my bumper, I could no longer see my own rear window in the mirror, only glare. I called 911 and got nothing. No signal. The road wound along the creek, every turn feeling slower than the one before. Twice the truck tapped my bumper, not hard enough to crash me, hard enough to say it could. My whole body felt carved out by adrenaline, hands numb, feet too sensitive on the pedals, breath short and shallow. I remember talking out loud to myself without realizing it. Come on, come on, come on. Then, ahead, I saw a porch light, a house close enough to the road to matter. I slammed on my horn and turned into the driveway without signaling. The truck behind me overshot a little, corrected, and stopped in the road for 1 long second with its engine revving. I kept the horn down. The house exploded to life in movement, a light upstairs, then another by the porch. A man came out in a t-shirt holding a shotgun pointed low. The truck in the road backed up fast, tires spitting gravel, then turned and disappeared the way we had come. I sat there with both hands on the horn until the man on the porch shouted for me to stop because I was scaring his wife. When I finally let go, the silence rang in my ears. I could barely get out enough words to explain. He brought me inside, locked the door, and called the sheriff from his landline. I never saw clearly who had been driving the truck. The sheriff did go out to the trailer with another unit before dawn. Darren was gone. The trailer belonged to an uncle, yes, but the uncle had been in county jail for 3 days. Nobody answered at the place. They found signs people had been there recently, and one room inside with a mattress, a camp lantern, and food wrappers, but no one to question. The sheriff asked me if I knew Darren to be involved in anything. I said no. I realized as I said it how little that actually meant. He took the messages Darren had sent me. The number stopped working the next day. The aftermath of that one went deeper than the others, because it carried shame with it. I had known him, or thought I had. I replayed every conversation we Euros TMD ever had, every casual meeting in town, every time he had seemed harmless, trying to locate the place where the truth of him had existed in plain sight, and I had missed it. Nobody likes admitting that they can be read more easily than they can read someone else. For a while after that, I stopped doing favors that took me onto unfamiliar roads at night. I made excuses. I said my car was acting up. I said I had work early. I didn't a Euros TMT trust my own ability to judge people the way I once had. And when you lose some trust in yourself, the world becomes heavier. You start second-guessing all your yeses and nos. You wonder how many close calls looked normal until the exact second they didn't a Euros TMT. I still think about Darren sometimes, not because I want answers from him, but because I want to understand how ordinary a face can remain while intention changes behind it. Maybe he had always been dangerous. Maybe desperation had bent him into something worse. Maybe he never planned anything, and the whole thing was some pressure from someone else at the trailer. I don't a Euros TMT know, but I remember that knock inside the wall and the shape against the covered window and the truck coming down after me with such certainty, and all of it feels connected in a way my mind still can't a Euros TMT make tidy. By the time these things have happened to you a few times, you start carrying yourself differently. You don't a Euros TMT always notice it day by day, but other people do. They comment that you seem more cautious, more privata, more inclined to leave early. What they don't a Euros TMT see is that fear leaves grooves. Once enough of those grooves are there, your thoughts slide into them automatically. You scan exits. You note whether a door was locked. You notice who knows you are Euros TMRE alone. It sounds exhausting written out like that, and maybe it is a little, but ETA Euros TM's also just adaptation. The body learning to live in a world that has shown its teeth without fully biting down. The last one IA Euros TMLL tell you tonight is quieter than some of the others, and maybe because of that it lingers the most. No chase, no hand on a door, no truck in the mirror, just a road, a house, and one long night that made me realize how thin the wall is between loneliness and fear. It happened not far from where I was living then, on a route I took often enough to stop thinking about it. A shortcut through a string of old properties and small turns where the same dogs were always in the same yards, and the same porch lights came on at the same hour every evening. I had driven it in rain, in fog, in broad daylight, in winter dark, familiar to the point of carelessness. There was one house on that road I always noticed without meaning to. A white farmhouse set back behind a split-rail fence, big sycamore in the yard, porch sagging a little on one side. An older woman lived there. IA Euros TMD seen her plenty of times over the years bringing in groceries, or sweeping the porch, or standing by the mailbox in a heavy sweater, even when it wasn't a Euros TMT that cold. We had waved to each other, maybe a dozen times. That was the extent of it. Just one of those road neighbor relationships built entirely out of recognition. Then one winter, after Christmas, but before New Year a Euros TMs, her porch light started staying on all day and all night. At first I barely noticed. Then I noticed because it kept happening. Morning, noon, after dark, through rain, through clear weather, always on. Her car, an old beige sedan, remained in the drive. The curtains stayed drawn. No footprints in the little bit of snow by the porch one week. I told myself she might be sick, might have family visiting, might simply have forgotten the light. Still, every time I passed, the house reached out and tapped at my attention a little harder. One evening just after dusk, with the air so cold it made the inside of my nose sting, I was coming back that way from town. The road was empty. My headlights swept over the fence, the sycamore, the porch. The light was on as usual. Then I saw the front door standing open, not wide, just enough to show dark beyond it. I drove past, kept going another quarter mile, then slowed, then stopped. I remember exactly what I was thinking. You are Euros TMRE tired. At a Euros TM's none of your business. Someone could already be there. She could be fine, but under that, the simpler thought kept pressing. If no one is there, and something is wrong, and you just keep driving, you are Euros T MLL. No, you did that. So I turned around. When I pulled into the drive, the gravel sounded unnaturally loud. The cold hit my face hard getting out of the car. There was no sound from the house at all, no television, no voices, no dog, just the light buzz over the porch and the distant brittle rustle of bare branches. I went up the steps and knocked on the open doorframe. Acid complesso euro legatura oello. Acer complex euros nothing. I called out again, using the respectful, polite tone you use with older strangers. Still nothing. The smell from inside was stale air, dust, old heat, and something faintly metallic. Va, couldn't a Euros TMT place. The entry opened into a front room with a couch, a lamp on, and a blanket folded neatly over the arm. Everything looked orderly, not ransacked, not abandoned, just paused. I should have stopped there and called someone. Maybe the sheriff, maybe a neighbor. Instead, I stepped inside because once you cross a certain age, and you are Euros T, MVE, had enough small, awful experiences pile up in your life, there are moments when doing the safe thing and doing the decent thing stop lining up cleanly, and you end up choosing with your stomach instead of your head. I only went 3 steps past the threshold. The floorboards gave a soft old house creak under my boots. The lamp in the front room cast a tired yellow light over a coffee table with 2 coasters on it, a stack of mail, and a pair of reading glasses folded carefully beside a crossword book. Nothing looked disturbed. A crocheted blanket was tucked over the couch arm like someone had set it there earlier that same day. A ceramic bowl of wrapped peppermints sat on the side table. The heat was on low enough that the house felt cool but lived in. It should have reassured me. Instead, it made the silence feel wrong in a deeper way, because a lived-in house is supposed to answer you somehow. A television murmuring from another room, a kettle, footsteps, a person clearing their throat, something. A circumflex euros, oh my euros T-mam. A circumflex euros, I called again, a little louder. My voice moved through the room and seemed to die before it reached the back hall. Then, from somewhere deeper in the house, I heard a chair scrape. It was a sharp wooden sound, brief and ordinary, but in that stillness it landed like a dropped plate. I turned toward the hall. There was a narrow runner rug there, and 3 framed family photos on the wall, all dark-eyed faces in church clothes, and school pictures, and wedding smiles caught by the lamp from the front room. At the far end of the hall, a doorway stood half open to what looked like the kitchen. The scrape had come from back there. I said, A circumflex euros, oh hello, are you all right? A circumflex euros, no answer. That was when the metallic smell I had noticed at the door got a little stronger. Not heavy, not enough to hit me all at once, just enough to make something cold move through my chest. I should have backed out right then, called the sheriff from the porch, waited in my car with the doors locked. Every sensible version of the night stops there. But the trouble with fear is that if you are Euros T MVE, known enough of it, you also know how often it turns out to be nothing. An older woman falls asleep in a chair. A pan gets left out. A door catches on the latch. I didn't a Euros TMT want to panic over nothing. And I didn't a Euros TMT want to leave if she was hurt and reachable, just a few rooms away. So I kept going. The hall felt colder than the front room. Not a dramatic cold, just the kind that seeps out of old walls in winter after dark. I passed an umbrella stand, a coat hook with 2 cardigans hanging on it, and a small table with a dish of spare change and a single house key. Halfway down, I noticed the first thing that truly made my body stiffen. There were muddy prints on the runner. Not many, just enough to register. 1 partial heel and 2 clearer marks, darkening the worn pattern in the rug. They weren't our Euros TMT huge. They didn't a Euros TMT scream anything by themselves, but they were fresh-looking in a house that otherwise seemed tidy and still, and they did not match the neat little snowless porch I had just crossed. I stared at them too long, mind splitting itself into explanations. Maybe the woman had tracked them earlier. Maybe a neighbor had come by. Maybe I was making too much of old stains. but I knew old stains and I knew fresh wet dirt. These were fresh. I took one more step and saw that the kitchen light was on. It was brighter than the lamp in the front room, but not enough to make the space feel safe. It was one of those square ceiling fixtures that throws a thin, tired white over everything beneath it and leaves the corners murky. The chair scrape had come from the kitchen table. One chair stood pulled out from the table at an angle, as if someone had gotten up too fast. There was a mug sitting there, tea gone cold, a skin formed over the top. A half-sliced loaf of bread sat open by the sink. The back door was shut, and on the floor, near the refrigerator, lay the old woman from the porch. I felt the whole world narrow at once. She was on her side, one hand curled under her chest, grey hair fallen loose around her face. I crossed the room without thinking and dropped to my knees. A circumflex euros, oh ma euros T ma'am. Ma euros T ma'am, can you hear me? A circumflex euros, her skin was cool but not cold. When I touched her shoulder, she made a small sound deep in her throat and tried to move. Relief hit so hard it made me dizzy for a second. She was alive. There was blood on the floor under her left temple, not a huge pool. A thin dark smear where she had likely fallen and struck the edge of something on the way down. That explained the metallic smell. I grabbed the dish towel from the counter and pressed it gently there while fumbling my phone out with the other hand. The signal was weak, but enough. I called 911 and began trying to explain. Elderly woman. Fell, maybe. Head injury. Alone in the house. Awake but not really responsive. The dispatcher kept me talking. Asked if she was breathing normally. Asked if the bleeding was heavy. Asked if I could unlock the door for EMS. My voice was steady in that strange way voices sometimes get when the fear becomes practical. I set the phone on speaker on the counter and did what I was told. Kept pressure on the towel. Spoke to the woman softly, though I wasn't a Euros TMT sure she understood me. Told her help was coming. Told her not to try to get up. Then, while I was kneeling there, I heard a soft thud from upstairs. My head came up on its own. The dispatcher was still talking, asking if the woman had any medications visible, and I answered automatically while listening with every nerve in me. The house went still again. Then came another sound, lighter this time, like a slow step above the kitchen. I remember looking toward the ceiling and feeling the temperature in my hands change even though I was still holding the towel against her head. My first thought was not ghost, not anything dramatic. My first thought was that someone else was in the house. I said, probably too quietly for the dispatcher to understand, A circumflex euros, oh, is there anyone else here? A circumflex euros, the old womaner euros TM's eyes opened halfway. They were cloudy with pain, but they moved toward me. Her mouth worked once before any sound came out. I leaned closer, thinking she might be trying to say her name. What she whispered was, A circumflex euros, oh donor, euros TMT, go upstairs. A circumflex euros, every muscle in my back locked. I said, A circumflex euros, oh, okay. I want a euros TMT. Help a euros TM's on the way. A circumflex euros, her fingers twitched weakly against the floor. She tried to speak again, and couldn't a euros TMT get it out. I told myself she was confused. Concussion. Shock. Maybe she had heard a raccoon in the attic some other night, and the warning was old fear spilling into this one. I told myself that because I needed to. Because the alternative was sitting on a kitchen floor, in a stranger a euros TM's house with an injured woman and unknown footsteps above me. The dispatcher heard something in my voice then and asked if I felt unsafe. I said, A circumflex euros. Oh, I think somebody else might be in the house. A circumflex euros. She told me to get out if I could do so safely. That should have settled it. But when I shifted to move, the woman gripped my sleeve with surprising strength. Not enough to stop me physically, enough to stop me morally. Her eyes were open wider now, and whatever confusion had been in them a second earlier had sharpened into something recognizably like fear. A circumflex euros, O donor euros TMT. Leave me. A circumflex euros, she said. I have thought about that moment more times than I can count. If I had been alone, I would have gone. If she had been unconscious, I might have dragged her or tried. But she was awake enough to ask me not to leave her, and I could hear something above us moving at long intervals, never hurrying, never obvious enough to make the whole situation simple. I told the dispatcher I was staying with her in the kitchen until the deputies or the ambulance arrived. She didn't a Euros TMT like that. I didn't a Euros TMT like it either, but it was what I chose. I locked the kitchen door, though I had no idea if that would matter, and pulled the chair I had heard scrape across the room so I could wedge it under the knob. My hands shook doing it. Every sound I made felt too loud. Then I came back to the woman and kept talking softly to keep her with me. Her name, she managed to tell me after a minute, was Edith. She said she had heard someone walking in the house for the last 3 nights. I thought at first she was rambling. I wanted it to be rambling. But the way she said it had a plainness that made my stomach turn. Not dramatic, not wild-eyed, just tired. Like she had been living with a fact no one else would believe. She said the first night she thought it was the old place settling. The second night she thought maybe an animal had gotten into the upper rooms. On the third night, she had heard her bedroom door move. When she came out to the hall with the phone in her hand, she saw someone standing at the far end by the stairs. Not moving, not speaking, just standing there in the dark between rooms. She said she had backed into the kitchen and fallen before she could make it to the back door. I asked what the person looked like. She shut her eyes for a second and whispered, "Acer complex euros, oh young. Acer complex euros," that was all. Another step sounded upstairs, then another, directly overhead this time, followed by a pause so long I started to doubt I had heard anything. My breathing had become shallow and controlled in the way it gets when you are Euros T MRE, trying not to make more sound than necessary. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in another room a clock ticked, faint and relentless. I could hear the dispatcher through the phone asking if officers had arrived yet, and I kept saying no, not yet, not yet. Then the kitchen doorknob moved, just once. Not hard, a careful test. My whole body surged with cold so fast it felt like dropping underwater. The chair wedged under the knob gave a tiny wooden complaint. Edith made a weak sound in her throat and grabbed at my wrist. The knob went still. I stared at it, unable for a second to think beyond the fact of it. Someone had come down the hall soundlessly enough that I had not heard the approach over the refrigerator and the clock and my own blood in my ears. The dispatcher was saying something urgent now, voice tinny through the speaker. I could not process the words. Then came 3 knocks on the other side of the kitchen door. Soft, spaced, patient. I nearly dropped the phone when I heard them because they were so horribly calm. Not the wild pounding of someone trying to break in, not the panicked knocking of someone scared, just a measured little sequence, as if whoever stood there knew time was on their side. I said, too loudly, "Acer complex euros. Oh, the police are on the way." Acer complex euros, no answer. For a second nothing happened. Then the knob turned again, a little harder. The chair legs dug against the floorboards. I looked around wildly for anything heavier, any weapon worth the name, and my eyes landed on the old butcher block on the counter, with a long bread knife still lying there from the half-cut loaf. I grabbed it. My hand was slick, and I nearly fumbled it. The knob stopped moving. Then, from the other side of the door, a voice said, very softly, "Acer complex euros, oh I know. Acer complex euros." I have heard hundreds of voices in my life that meant no harm at all. This one did. I knew that before reason could explain why. It was young, yes. Male maybe, but light enough that I could not be certain. Calm in the same way the knocks were calm. And there was something else in it I can still hear, if a room gets quiet enough around me. Familiarity. Not that I knew the voice. That it spoke as though it knew me. As though all of this was simply delayed recognition. Edith began crying without tears, the way elderly people sometimes do when pain and fear have gone beyond the body Euros TM's neat responses. I kept telling her to breathe. I kept looking at the window over the sink and calculating whether I could break it, unlock it, get her through it somehow. The window was small, old, painted shut in places. Even if I smashed it, I was not sure I could get her out quickly enough without doing more damage. The voice on the other side of the door did not speak again. What I heard instead was the faintest drag of fingertips down the painted wood, not scratching, not clawing, just a slow glide from near the top panel to the lower one, like someone tracing the shape of the door from the outside. I had to force my knees not to fold. Then, finally, from the road outside, I heard the sound I had been praying for without even knowing it. Tires on gravel, and the burst of a car door opening hard. The person on the other side of the kitchen door moved away at once. This time I did hear the steps. Quick, light, crossing the hall, then the front of the house, then nothing. I shouted that we were in the kitchen. A deputy shouted back. I kicked the chair aside, unlocked the door with clumsy fingers, and nearly fell when I opened it because my legs had gone weak without my permission. 2 deputies came in fast, one staying with Edith, while the other moved through the rooms with his hand on his holster. More lights flooded the yard outside through the curtains. An ambulance crew came with a stretcher. Everything turned brisk and procedural in the way official help does, and for a minute that almost erased the fear. Almost. Then the deputy who had cleared the house came back into the kitchen and said there was no one inside. He said it with that professional flatness that tries not to amplify panic. But there was something uncertain in his eyes. They took Edith to the hospital. I rode behind the ambulance in my car because one of the medics suggested she might feel better, seeing a familiar face when she woke properly, and at that point, I was too wrung out to argue. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and overheated air. I sat under bright waiting room lights with a paper cup of bad coffee and hands that would not stop trembling. A deputy came by after a while to take my statement more carefully. That was when he mentioned the upstairs. They had found one bedroom window open an inch from the top, despite the cold, and on the sill there was a clean half moon where dust had been disturbed. Not a full footprint, not enough to prove anything definite, but enough to suggest recent contact. In the hall outside that room, they found muddy residue on the floorboards, not unlike what I had seen on the runner downstairs. The back stairs to the kitchen, however, had been dry. No usable prints, no person, no obvious point at which someone could have slipped out after police arrived. He asked if Edith had enemies. I almost laughed from exhaustion. Edith looked like the kind of woman who baked for funerals and remembered children at TM's birthdays. I said I had no idea. He wrote that down anyway. The aftermath of that night lasted a long time because it attached itself to a piece of my daily life that had once felt automatic. I still had to drive that road. For weeks, every time I passed Edita TM's house, even after her relatives began coming and going, even after the porch light changed, even after there were clear signs of occupancy again, my shoulders would creep up around my neck without me noticing. If the curtains were drawn, I felt uneasy. If they were open, I felt uneasy. If a shadow moved in an upstairs window, my stomach turned over before my mind could name what I was seeing. Edith survived. The fall gave her stitches and a concussion, but she survived. I visited her once in rehab after her niece asked me to, and in daylight, with people moving through halls and televisions on in other rooms, she looked smaller and more ordinary than fear had made her that night. Her hands shook when she held the foam cup of water. She thanked me 3 times in under a minute. Then she asked whether the deputies had caught the boy. I said they had not found anyone. She looked down into the cup for a long time before saying, "A circumflex euros, oh, he used to stand by the road when he was little." A circumflex euros, I asked who she meant. She told me, slowly, about a grandson who had died years earlier. Car accident, 19 years old. Not evil, not violent, not anything like the shape fear gives you in the dark. Just a troubled boy who had spent a lot of time at her house and had a habit of coming to the kitchen door instead of the front because he said the house felt friendlier that way. She spoke of him with the dull, worn tenderness people use when grief has had years to settle into their bones. Then she shook her head as if waking herself. A circumflex euros o theta euros TMs, not who was there. A circumflex euros, she said. A circumflex euros, oh, I know that. A circumflex euros, I didn't euros TMT. Tell her that the voice at the kitchen door had sounded young. I never found out whether there was a living intruder that night, some drifter, some local addict, some person using old houses and dark roads, the way other people use convenience stores and parking lots. That explanation is still the one I lean toward because I need the world to keep some ordinary shape But there are loose threads I can't euros TMT tie off. The way the house felt paused instead of ransacked. The way the knocks were almost gentle. The way Edith had already been hearing movement for nights. The way that voice said I know, as if we were continuing something instead of beginning it. Sometimes the scariest things are not the ones you can prove. Fire euros TMRE, the ones that never sit still long enough to become evidence. And that is what all of these roads and houses and long dark drives have taught me more than anything else. Fear is not always loud. Most of the time it isna euros TMT. Most of the time it arrives as a detail you could explain away if you needed to. A door open an inch. A person too eager to help. Footsteps where no one should be. A voice using the right words with the wrong feeling inside them. The human mind is built to smooth rough edges. It wants a sensible room to stand in. It wants the story to settle into something with walls and labels and a clean ending. But some nights refuse that kindness. What changes you, if you live through enough of them, is not just the danger itself. At a euros TMs, the long, slow understanding that instinct is not weakness. It is not overreaction. It is not rudeness. It is your oldest form of knowledge, trying to speak before your pride talks over it. I used to think being sensible meant being calm at all costs, giving everyone the benefit of the doubt, not embarrassing yourself, not making a scene. I don't euros TMT think that anymore. I think being sensible means noticing what your body notices. I think it means respecting the small shift in the air before the obvious thing happens. I think it means remembering that politeness is a social skill, not a survival strategy. I euros TMVE also learned that fear leaves a kind of grief behind it, not just because of what almost happened or what did happen, but because once you are euros TMVE seen how quickly ordinary places can go wrong, you don't euros TMT, get your old innocence back. A familiar road is still beautiful at sunset, but part of you measures where you could pull over and where you shouldn't euros TMT. A house with a porch light on can still look warm, but part of you wonders who else can see that light and what it tells them. You become someone who notices more, and noticing more is a burden as much as it is protection. There are nights when I wish I had never learned any of it. I wish the dark could go back to being only dark. I wish a knock on a door could remain just a knock. I wish every stranger who smiled at me from the side of the road had stayed a stranger and nothing more. But wishing does no euros TMT, undo knowledge. Once the world has shown you the thin places in it, you carry them with you. Not all the time in a dramatic way. Most days ita euros TMs quiet. Most days it looks like habit. Locking a door sooner, leaving a place earlier. Trusting the pause in your chest when something small doesna euros TMT feel right. And still, for all of that, I don't euros TMT think these stories have made me hopeless. If anything, they have made me more honest, more respectful of the strange intelligence inside fear, but also more aware of the good that keeps appearing in answer to it. The deputy who took me seriously, even when I couldn't euros TMT, prove a thing. The man on the porch who came out with a shotgun pointed low because he understood what it meant for someone to lean on a horn in the middle of the night. The real tow driver with grease on his sleeves and a company logo that looked like daylight to me. The people who answer phones in the dark and stay on the line while your voice shakes. The relatives who come sit with you after. The friends who don't euros TMT laugh when you say, I know how it sounds, but something was wrong. Maybe thought euros TM's the truest thing I can leave you with at the end of a long night like this. The world is not simple. It never was. There are ordinary roads that hold ugly intentions. There are houses full of memory that can turn uncanny without warning. There are voices that use kindness like a hand, reaching into the wrong part of your life. But there is also the part of you that knows. The part that tightens before your mind has assembled the facts. The part that notices the missing warmth in a smile, the patience in a knock, the weight of silence in a room that should answer back. That part of you is not foolish. It is not dramatic. It is the oldest witness you have. So if you take anything from me tonight, let it be this. If the road feels wrong, keep driving. If the house feels wrong, step back. If the person in front of you asks too much too quickly, you do not owe them comfort at the expense of your own safety. You are allowed to disappoint a stranger. You are allowed to seem rude. You are allowed to listen to the cold little warning moving through you, even when you cannot yet translate it into neat language. Fear is not always there to frighten you. Sometimes it is there to escort you home. And when the night gets quiet enough that you begin hearing old sounds again, the ones that lodged themselves in you from years ago, try not to fight too hard with the memory of them. The hand on the door, the step in the hall, the voice outside the window. Those things stay because your mind is trying to keep the map updated. It is trying to love you in the oldest way it knows. Not softly, maybe, not gently, but faithfully. I still drive Appalachian roads. I still pass black tree lines and narrow bridges and houses with one light burning in the back. I still feel that old tension some nights when the moon is thin and the gas gauge is lower than IA Euros TMD like, and there are Euros TMs. No signal on my phone. But I also know this now. The darkness in those places is not what changes a life. What changes a life is the moment you realize the dark has been listening back. Some roads stop being empty forever the first time you understand what almost found you there.